So we've been learning about the idea of reconsolidation, that a reactivated memory must be reconsolidated again for it to be retained, and a procedure that interferes with reconsolidation can weaken that memory. So one of the ways to weaken a memory was to use electroconvulsive shock, another way protein synthesis inhibitors. In this research, in this lesson, we're going to see that a team of researchers used an extinction procedure to interfere with reconsolidation. And to see how that works, we need to reconsider what extinction was. So first, let's imagine the animal is undergoing some training. Tone shock, tone shock, tone shock. So we have the condition response on the y-axis here, trial 1, 2, 3, 4. And in the conditioning training, we get tone shock, tone shock, tone shock, and pretty soon the animal is responding with fear to the tone, right? So that's the condition response. Biologically, what's happening? Of course, the animal is in a training chamber, so the hippocampus is sort of registering the episode, the event, right? But the actual memory for the association appears to be in the amygdala. So tone shock pathway, that tone pathway will be strengthened, and consequently, after training, the animal will show fear to the tone alone. All right. The animal will also show fear to the training chamber as well. But the memory for the association of tone and shock is in the amygdala. Now, suppose you come along and do tone alone, tone alone, tone alone, right? That was the extinction procedure. The condition response decreases over time. Now, what's thought to be happening here is not that pathway, the tone pathway, is weakening. A second memory was forming that was inhibiting the condition response. So extinction is thought to be a second memory. And some of the evidence for that, remember, was if you lesion this area of the frontal cortex, you cannot successfully do the extinction procedure. They will just continue to be fearful of the tone, even though they just hear it tone alone, tone alone. Secondly, the frontal cortex has an inhibitory relationship with the amygdala, as if a memory out here could be inhibiting the expression of the fear memory. So there's good evidence that the frontal cortex is the site of this new learning, and that it's having an inhibitory effect on the amygdala. In addition, situations like stress, which impair frontal cortex function, allow older memories to resurface, right? So it's solid evidence that extinction produces a second memory. Now, what these researchers are going to do, though, is use an extinction procedure, though, to impair reconsolidation at the original site of the fear memory. Here's their procedure. They're going to use a simple classical conditioning paradigm. They're going to be measuring skin conductance on people when they are given shocks, and they're going to be seeing a certain kind of visual stimulus that is going to be associated with a shock. So they'll see a yellow square, and then they're going to get a shock right on the wrist. And then meanwhile, they're measuring the fear response by measuring their skin conductance. When we're afraid of something, we tend to sweat a little bit, and you can measure that. So in the procedure, in the training procedure, they get a yellow square, shock, yellow square, shock, yellow square, shock. Pretty soon, people will show a fear response, right? Increased skin conductance whenever they just see the yellow square. Now, the interesting thing about this research is they're going to try to impair the memory by doing an extinction procedure within a certain time window of being reminded of the memory. And to see kind of the logic of the experiment, let's take a look at this diagram. Okay, so the researchers are going to use an extinction paradigm to block reconsolidation. Let's first review what extinction was, right? So remember, on day 1, you might have CS-US pairing, so yellow square, shock. Now, if you come back day 2 and just give the yellow square, if the person has remembered this association, right, if that has been learned, then you're going to get increased skin conductance. You'll get a condition response. But then if you come back on day 3 and you give the yellow square alone, the response will be a little less. You come back on day 4, yellow square alone. Notice you're not pairing it anymore with the shock. You get a decrease in the condition response. And we think the idea there is that there's a new memory that is inhibiting the expression of the condition response. Well, what the researchers are going to do is take this kind of extinction procedure, but they're going to perform that procedure at a certain time. And that time is going to be within the window of reconsolidation. So here's what they'll do. Yellow square, shock, right? Then on the next day, right, they're going to remind the subject, just like they did here testing, going to remind the subject of that association by just giving the yellow square. There will be some indication, a skin conductance response, but then 10 minutes after the reminder, they're going to do yellow square alone, yellow square alone, yellow square alone. In other words, they're doing the extinction procedure that in many other studies was carried out over extended periods. They're doing it right after a reminder. And this is within the window of molecular consolidation, right, which is about 6 hours for late phase LTP. So you are doing this extinction at the time when that memory has to be reconsolidated. And sure enough, if you come back and give them the yellow square alone, what happens? No condition response. It's as if this extinction procedure has erased the original association. So notice, it's not the creation of a new inhibitory memory. You are altering the original memory. And supporting evidence for that comes with another condition in the experiment. You do the same kind of training, and on the next day you give the subject the reminder, the yellow square. Yep, there's a little fear there, right? So they have a skin conductance response. But then you wait 6 hours before you do the same kind of extinction technique up here and test the next day. You get a condition response. Right? So when the extinction happens outside the window of reconsolidation, it doesn't affect the original memory. But when the extinction procedure happens inside the window of consolidation, then you can erase the memory.